Okay, we were just talking about U.S. information strategy, and now we're going to be talking about Chinese information strategy, or are we? That's what Glenn will tell us in a moment. Let me introduce our really great speaker today. We're very lucky to have him. Glenn Gerstell served as the General Counsel of the National Security Agency and the Central Security Service, which is part of NSA, from 2015 to 2020. He's written and spoken widely about the intersections of technology and national security and privacy. Before joining the NSA, he practiced law for almost 40 years at the international law firm of Milbank. It used to be called Milbank Tweed. I don't know, these things always get shortened and modernized over time. He also served on the President's National Infrastructure Advisory Council, which reports to the President and Secretary of Homeland Security on threats to the nation's infrastructure, and on DC's Homeland Security Commission. He's a graduate of New York University and Columbia Law School, and an elected member of the American Academy of Diplomacy and member of the Council on Foreign Relations. And he's had various other very impressive honors, received various government medals for his service, and I can say from experience that he's one of the most perceptive and astute commentators on issues related to emerging technology, national security, information security, and so forth. So I'll welcome Glenn up to the podium here, and then we'll have Q&A afterwards, and be sure to think of your questions as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Adam. And maybe I'll just start by asking the audience here. We have an audience here. We can't get see what people answer online to my question. But how many of you have TikTok? Okay, quite a few here. Good. Well, good that you were familiar with the app, and we'll see at the end of this conversation whether you still want to keep the app. So if we were to pick just one topic that would serve as a microcosm for most of the issues that we're considering at this three-day conference on global media and foreign policy and diplomacy. Sorry, let me just get my text here correct. It'll take me a second. Of course, there's always a technical problem, naturally. Give me a second.
Fail-safe American technology.
You know what happened? I think TikTok got into the thing, and exactly. Okay, if we were to pick just one topic that would serve as a microcosm for most of the issues that we're considering at this three-day conference on global media and foreign policy and diplomacy, we probably couldn't do much better than TikTok. This one extraordinarily popular application has it all: cybersecurity problems, privacy and technology concerns, substantive content questions, and geopolitical challenges. And it is popular. The second most visited site on the web, with 1 billion users around the world, and 150 million of them here in the United States. 2 out of every 3 American teenagers use the app. Thanks in part to a certain Chinese spy balloon that floated over our country and ended up in the waters off South Carolina, everyone by now, of course, has heard about the national security interests said to be threatened, posed by this app. But outside of the Washington Beltway, most Americans are a little confused and uncertain about why they should really worry about something that seemingly everyone uses to catch up with the latest fashions, to catch the hottest dance moves, or to snare recipes for dinner. As someone who spent recently 5 years at the top levels of our intelligence agencies, I can try to dispel some of that confusion and tell you why there is a national security threat and what we might do about it. But more importantly, I'd like to explain why TikTok is, as I said, a microcosm of many of the broader issues that we must address in the midst of this digital revolution. So let's start with TikTok itself. When the CEO of TikTok testified at a recent congressional hearing, representatives warned about how China might misuse TikTok, given that TikTok is owned by ByteDance, a Chinese company. They cited 2 concerns. First, that the electronic data of American users might be siphoned off by the government of the People's Republic of China for nefarious purposes. And second, that the PRC government might direct TikTok to spread disinformation or alter its content recommending algorithms to manipulate American public opinion. Those two risks aren't far-fetched. China's 2017 national intelligence law requires all Chinese companies to affirmatively cooperate and support intelligence efforts. So the PRC government could direct ByteDance to have its controlled subsidiary TikTok hand over data that TikTok collects about American users. And data collection is at the core of its business model. It needs to do that to generate precisely targeted advertising. Last year, TikTok collected $6 billion in advertising dollars just in America. And exactly what does TikTok collect about you? Your name, age, email address, your location at any given moment, what you viewed and searched for on the app, the kind of phone and web browser you're using, and of greater concern, potentially what else you've looked at on your phone or laptop, including web browsing history and other factors. Now, of course, TikTok isn't alone in this kind of information gathering, although some experts have said that its collection abilities are more sophisticated and extensive than other apps. In fact, just to help them get a full picture for advertising purposes, TikTok collects information about someone every time they visit many popular websites, even if they've never used or downloaded the app. Now, to be fair, there's no evidence thus far that the PRC government has directed TikTok to hand over Americans' user data, and TikTok claims that it would resist doing so. But nobody's ever said how they would have a legal basis for refusing the Chinese government's demands. And as to content, it's easy to see how, given the ubiquity of the app, plus the fact that the average American user spends over an hour and a half a day on it, that even subtle content changes could well influence public opinion. And Exhibit A, in the case of just how potent and impactful the app can be, is that TikTok is banned in China itself. Instead, ByteDance is allowed to deploy Douyin, a tamer version of the app subject to strict PRC government censorship. So, for example, in the months preceding a planned invasion of Taiwan, TikTok could be commandeered in a campaign to turn Americans against getting involved in any conflict. This wouldn't have to take the form of blatant propaganda, but could be fairly subtle, maybe by merely bumping up in popularity some negative views about Taiwan, or otherwise presenting accurate information about the extent to which the US and China rely on each other for trade, and therefore how disastrous it would be for Americans if that were to be interrupted, perhaps complete with videos of empty shelves in every Walmart. The risks that user data could be stolen and public opinion could be manipulated are troublesome. But they're made even worse by the fact that we wouldn't find out about it until it's too late. We might never know if user data has been siphoned off, and even if we somehow discovered it, by definition, it's already in the wrong hands and we can't get it back. And similarly, once disinformation videos go viral or content manipulation shifts public opinion, even a percentage point or two, we'll know it only after the fact. We all realize you can never fully rebut untruthful news once it's been disseminated. At best, suspicions will linger, and at worst, some part of the public is forever convinced of some untruth. So that's why national security officials in both the Trump and Biden administrations, including the Director of National Intelligence and the heads of the FBI, the CIA, and the NSA, have said that TikTok represents a threat to our country. You remember that President Trump tried to ban the app, but subsequent judicial challenges determined that he did not have the legal authority to do so. As a result, Congress stepped in and banned the use of the app on devices owned by the federal government and the military, and now a majority of states have done the same thing with state-owned phones and networks. A ban on federal government and military devices makes sense and reflects the right balance of cost and benefit. It's not clear in the first place why most government employees even need the app. And there's no reason we need to facilitate the PRC government's figuring out the geolocation of our troops, or diplomats, or spies. The federal and state bans don't apply to individuals using TikTok on their own personal phones or computers, and thus for people in particularly sensitive positions, some counterintelligence concerns may still be present. So if the national security case against TikTok is strong enough, that it makes sense to ban the app from official government phones, why not go all the way and ban the app for the general public? After all, another big democracy has done just that. India outlawed the app over 2 years ago in the midst of border hostilities with China. Maybe we shouldn't wait until we're in actual conflict. Why take the risk that in the future China will twist the app for its own strategic purposes, recognizing that on the eve of an invasion of Taiwan it may be too late? In short, if we're worried about the Chinese Communist Party manipulating opinion among the general population and the capturing of our digital footprints, shouldn't we take action now? All good questions. But I think there are even better answers why a general public ban doesn't make sense. As usual in technology, there's rarely a one-size-fits-all solution. First, and certainly in keeping with the theme of this conference, America looks good when we can draw a sharp contrast between our open and transparent democracy and the closed authoritarian regime of China. After all, it's China, not the US, that bans YouTube, Google, Facebook, Snapchat, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Dropbox, Instagram, WhatsApp, Tumblr, Quora. Well, the list could go on for a few more minutes. Of course, like every other country, we are entitled to protect our national security. But banning a Chinese app used by 1 billion people around the world isn't necessarily going to be seen by many other nations as a legitimate national security action, but more likely as a geopolitical one reflecting tensions with a rising China. Indeed, our action could unintentionally embolden and give an excuse to far less democratic regimes to curtail public speech. A ban on TikTok is also legally complicated. Let's start with the government's removing a communications app used by a large percentage of the country raises immediate First Amendment concerns. We've never taken the step of banning a social media app. And legal scholars are divided on whether the Supreme Court precedent would support such a prohibition. Even if it did, just the sheer legal mechanics of a ban are difficult. Presumably, it wouldn't make sense to criminalize an individual's use or downloading of the app. So would the actual prohibition be a ban on TikTok being sold and distributed through app stores? If so, there would be easy and legal ways around it, including by accessing app stores out of the country. Or would the ban take some form of precluding advertising on the app or effecting financial transactions through the app? All possibilities, but none that would truly have the effect of eliminating it from the American social media landscape. Even if we could work out these legal difficulties, a ban still sets a bad precedent. Once we've outlawed a particular social media app, can we be certain that future calls to ban some other app would be limited to only those that present a foreign adversary security risk? Sometimes public policy options are all unattractive and regrettably force us down a slippery slope. But we're not there yet, and we shouldn't let political winds blow us down that path. We've heard assertions from members of Congress that TikTok is like a Chinese spy balloon in your pocket. But the reality is that the government hasn't spelled out in any convincing way what the scope of that risk is for the general public. By contrast, an intense political focus on this app, partly because it's so visible and easily understood, perpetuates our ad hoc approach to technology decisions in which we focus on the shiny and the easy. It arguably takes the pressure off the adoption of baseline privacy legislation, which almost every other industrialized democracy has adopted, and which could definitely address the user data risk in TikTok. But the most compelling argument against a full ban is that there are less dramatic solutions that can address the risks in a more tailored way. The Biden administration has been negotiating with TikTok for the past 2 years on a solution that would involve American user data from TikTok being stored only in the United States with restricted access, an American board of directors overseeing its operations, and independent orders to make sure the rules were complied with. No one's saying the solution's perfect and it could be further improved on, but it would certainly go a long way to minimizing the risks. And if we were to drive down those risks that way, well, frankly, there are much more likely and potentially significant risks associated with Chinese spying that we should instead be worrying about, such as their ongoing industrial espionage and their extensive efforts to recruit university professors and research laboratory scientists and employees in strategically sensitive industries. Actually, the fact that we are having so much trouble coming up with a solution here is telling. Indeed, this is a good point to return to my comment that TikTok is a perfect microcosm of the issues that this conference, and indeed our society, should address. The speed with which TikTok went from a novel app that caught the fancy of some teenagers to seeming omnipresence, the problematic affiliation with a country that is both an adversary and a critical trading partner, and our struggles in addressing the perceived risks are all attributes that we now recognize as hallmarks of the digital revolution. Let's focus on two of the more salient attributes because a clear-eyed understanding of them can help illuminate the way to the development of sound public policy in this area. The two are related and in many ways are both the cause and effect of each other on multiple levels. One is that the speed of the digital revolution is outpacing our ability to deal with it. And the second is that the digital revolution is simultaneously both bringing us together and pulling us apart. Let's separate them for purposes of this analysis and start with the proposition that, even though well accepted, isn't fully appreciated, and that is that the digital revolution has washed over us so quickly that we haven't had the time to develop rules, norms, and laws to deal with both the use and misuse of technology. Prior technological developments, for example, the automobile, electricity, telephones, and aviation, all took decades between the time of invention and having a meaningful impact on everyday life. But because of their omnipresence, we tend to forget just how recent internet-based applications really are. YouTube was founded in 2005, Facebook only became a thing in our lives in 2010, and of course TikTok didn't even exist until late 2016. Since it's easier to embrace the obvious benefits of these technologies than it is to understand, let alone address, some of the negative consequences, no wonder it takes time to develop new rules. The second attribute is the tension between globalization and fragmentation occasioned by technological development. And the fact that the development cycle is so compressed makes this tension even more difficult to deal with. We don't need much explanation or examination of the powerful drivers that promote and the results of globalization, forces that ignore sovereign boundaries. In particular, digital and industrial technology has generated extraordinary benefits in global economic efficiencies. That 1 billion people around the globe use TikTok is a manifestation of this powerful force. But this globalization has obvious geopolitical ramifications. To mention just two, first, as we see so vividly in the case of TikTok, the global nature of technological development and trade produces entanglements and reliance on relationships that aren't necessarily congruent with national, political, and strategic goals. While our focus here today is on global media, this attribute of the digital revolution has nearly universal applicability. Whether it's a pandemic that originates halfway around the world or shortages of semiconductors from overseas that halt automobile production here, we daily see how technology has created deeply complex dependencies. Moreover, the globalization and interdependencies are self-reinforcing. The more commonality we have, the harder it is to be a holdout. And indeed, beyond economic efficiency, there's no denying that deep mutual trade and financial relationships have a moderating effect on national conflicts. For example, as the second largest holder of US government debt with over $1 trillion of Treasury securities, and as a country 17% of whose international trade is with the United States, China isn't looking to pick a war with us, even if there are frictions. In fact, in spite of tensions reaching exceptionally high levels recently, last year, the US and China had $700 billion of imports and exports, the most ever. In contrast, there are forces working in the opposite direction, etching those sovereign boundaries even deeper and pushing us to impose restrictions on international trade and finance and limitations on the free flow of information. This conference has highlighted many of those issues in the context of global media. Look no further than how the Ukrainian war has led to a wide range of national restrictions on business activities and information flows. At least at this point in a world seemingly riven by conflict and with authoritarian regimes showing no sign of retreat, it's easy to see how national divisions will only continue to increase. Putting aside the nefarious efforts of authoritarian governments, legitimate national security concerns can also have the effect of creating more walls dividing the globe. Beyond our fears about TikTok, we worry about complex supply chains with known and unknown risks. For example, concerns over surveillance capabilities have caused many Western countries to limit Russia's Kaspersky software. We've banned Chinese products such as Huawei telecoms gear and DJI drones, and restricted exports of microchips and other sensitive products to China for fear of handing them free innovations to copy. By the way, one of the challenges with banning TikTok is, where do we stop? Lenovo laptops, GE appliances, Volvo cars are all Chinese owned, and in theory present comparable data tracking concerns. This all increases the risk that we will have a world where there are two competing technological standards for many products, a Chinese one and a Western one, raising costs, hurting interoperability, curtailing innovation, and isolating the two economies. And most concerningly, removing some of the constraints that might otherwise avoid conflict. In short, and somewhat perversely, tackling perceived national security risks in technology by keeping products and services out of our country might ultimately make us less safe. Let me conclude by emphasizing how critical it is that we understand the trade-offs involved. And conferences like this are exactly what's needed. I don't think it's an overstatement to say that how well we manage the risk associated with the ever-widening gap between technological advances and our ability to effectively address the vulnerabilities created thereby, and how well we cope with the multifaceted and ambivalent threat posed by a rising China will be the defining elements of our nation's well-being over the next decade or two. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Glenn. A lot to unpack there. We're going to dig right into it.
Okay.
I'm going to start by giving you a scenario. Let's imagine that it's 2027. Xi Jinping has given the order to either blockade or invade Taiwan, and as part of that, he's going to launch an all-out attack on U.S. bases in the Western Pacific. And in case you don't follow this, that's exactly what they're building their military to do, and it's a very real threat, as our military leaders acknowledge. They're looking at TikTok with its billions of users around the world, 100 million users in the United States, and they decide that they are going to increase the distribution of videos of the first American ship that they blow up burning, and they're going to intersperse that with videos of teenagers screaming about how they don't want to go to war, they don't want their brother to die, and why are we fighting at all for a faraway place? And they'll mix that in with a few nice dance videos, recipes, and all the other stuff that some of the people in this room are enjoying on their TikTok app every day. What's wrong with that scenario? Obviously, we know what's wrong with it, but is there some flaw in that scenario? And if you agree that that's plausible, and I certainly think it is, given that this would be an existential event for the CCP, and so they would pull out all the stops to make sure it succeeds, how can we reassure ourselves that we can prevent that while allowing TikTok to continue to operate here?
So that, of course, is a big concern, and we can partially, but not completely, address that risk. And my point, as I think I made clear, is that we need to balance the risks and reward here. But to that risk, I will not deny that is indeed a risk. But here's how we could manage. Here's how we could manage it and put it in context. First of all, as I said, the Biden administration has been negotiating with TikTok over this process that would address some of these national security risks by putting in place an American board of directors, allowing its algorithm to be directly inspected by U.S. overseers. And at a time of conflict such as that, and I've talked to two of the people who are proposed to be, who have been informally nominated to be these American overseers, they would be on super heightened alert to look for this, and there would be daily tests of content created on TikTok to see if there's any deviation from the norm. So we would be on high alert to try to catch something like that. Obviously, if something like that happened, we could then invoke these stronger powers to ban the app. But yes, it is entirely possible that something could slip through early on and could have some effect in affecting American public opinion. I might add, we face the same risk on Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, where Chinese bots or even just Americans could post information, including both disinformation and accurate information. So my point isn't that we can completely eliminate this, because I don't think it's realistic in the social media landscape to do that. I think we can drive down the risk to a manageable level. Not perfect. We're going to be faced with that risk, Adam, I fear, under any circumstances. But I concede you are right that it is a concern.
So you talked about the difficulty of figuring out a good remedy for this problem, if indeed it is a problem. A lot of the discussion was centered on a ban, so just prohibiting the use of the app. Legally speaking, and we're going to avoid jargon here, no jargon zone, there are two ways to do this. One is a ban of the app and transacting with the app, and that happens under what we'll call, in the jargon-free zone, sanctions powers. The president has all these sanctions powers that Congress has given him. He can use sanctions powers to ban transactions with TikTok. There's a separate vein of legal powers, which we will call investment, national security investment controls. We're not going to get into the jargon. If you're interested, come find me afterwards. Under those powers, the president has the authority to order ByteDance, which is the Chinese parent company, to divest TikTok. It used to be called Musical.ly. And ByteDance bought Musical.ly some years ago. And the president has the power under a law that Congress has passed and given very broad authority to order divestiture, so to order them to sell. And in fact, in the waning days of the Trump administration ordered them to sell, but didn't have time to force them to go through with it. Now, notably, as you know, the Biden administration has not revoked that order. It's still hanging out there over their head like the sword of Damocles, presumably as an incentive to play ball on these other controls that you're talking about. So let's say maybe we think a ban is complicated for various reasons. Why not just go through with the divestiture and have them sell it to Microsoft? I think Walmart was even in the discussion as a potential buyer. So there were US companies that were lining up to buy this thing, given its revenue, given its distribution, and so forth. Why not just have them sell it to an American company? Everyone can keep their recipes, keep their dance videos, and no problems about Chinese data collection or propaganda.
So it would be nice if it was that simple. It isn't. First of all, many of the objections that I stated in my comments about how we look around the world and difficulties would still apply in the case of a divestment. Admittedly, from a legal point of view, a divestment is easier than a ban, but even so, ByteDance isn't going to agree to it. First of all, the expected sale price of ByteDance, of TikTok from that ByteDance would be willing to sell is probably deep into the tens of billions of dollars, given its advertising potential that I just referred to here. There are very limited numbers of buyers for it. It's not at all clear they'd want to get legally enmeshed in it. And most importantly, ByteDance would surely object to it because the Chinese government would object to it. So we'd wind up in court. That's not something the Biden administration wants to do because they are not 100% confident of their ability to prevail in a legal fight, and they don't want to have this be a bad test case that would hurt these very, very important national security powers. So they're quite reluctant. Otherwise, they would have just gone ahead and said, fine, divest. Fine, you don't like it, sue us and we'll win in court. They are concerned they will not win in court. So again, my point sounds a little nuanced, which is that yes, a divestment would be a little better than a ban. And I think ultimately, by the way, if ByteDance doesn't agree to this project that I described, which is this negotiation to deal with the national security concerns, then I'm still reluctantly in favor of a divestment. It's just that I think when you put it all together, put it on a scale, I think it still comes out in favor of not going ahead with the divestment, including for these legal problems. But it's a good question.
Just to follow up on that, there were U.S. companies lining up to buy this thing. Microsoft could write the check in a heartbeat. Walmart could write the check in the heartbeat for $10 billion or whatever.
Not at all clear at having.
Let's just stipulate that someone's willing to pay the money.
Maybe.
And so ByteDance at that point, the company is facing a choice between 0 or 10 billion. Well, any private enterprise is going to choose the 10 billion. But I actually agree with you. There's a non-trivial chance, maybe a very good chance, that the Chinese government says, nope, we don't want your money. We don't need $10 billion. Right. We're going to shut you down just to make the Biden administration suffer for having done this to us and to make the point. Doesn't that actually signify that what's going on here is driven by strategic logic of the Chinese Communist Party rather than commercial logic?
Partly. Again, I'm not so sure that's what would happen. ByteDance, I don't think, is going to give up on this phenomenal product that has 1 billion users around the world. That's really quite extraordinary. We don't other than Google and Facebook, we don't have anything even comparable to it, and those are both U.S. products. So I don't see the Chinese cutting off their nose for their spite their face, whatever the expression is. So I'm not so sure about that. Yes, strategic concerns do play a factor in it, but at the end of the day, this is a huge economic issue.
So following up on that economic point, you mentioned that China doesn't allow U.S. social media apps. You also mentioned that TikTok is raking in $6 billion in advertising to U.S. users. So in any other area of trade, if a country was making a ton of money here doing something that they explicitly banned us from selling into their country, we would say, this doesn't work. Either open your markets, allow reciprocity, or we're going to do what you're doing to us. Why isn't the commercial logic here, the trade logic, the fair trade argument, so to speak, pretty straightforward?
It is straightforward, but it's caught in a larger political issue. I mean, if we really felt that way about it, if we really said, look, China, you're not being fair. You're cutting out this and you're cutting out that, and et cetera, and we in America would say, okay, well, if that's the case, then we don't want any Americans dealing with China. And by the way, Apple, you can't make your phones in China. Until China agrees to allow YouTube and the New York Times in the country, we're going to hurt you just as much. These tit-for-tat trade arguments all are nuanced and complicated. There's no clear answer to them. I'm not making an excuse for them, but the reality is that each one of them is sort of a case-by-case determination as to taking into account all the political realities and the economic realities. We are, at the moment, seemingly content to allow China to continue to ban all these other U.S. operations and let China continue to do things here in the United States that are unfair in the sense of they're not symmetrical for purposes of broader issues. I mean, it's an unattractive trade-off. I'm not going to say anything on that.
Let's talk about the data collection piece a bit. You were general counsel of the NSA. You may know a thing or two about data collection from experience.
Not at all.
So, as you know very well, this is the jargon-free zone. We're not going to say the word Section 702. We're just going to talk about things that the U.S. government can do when data from overseas transits through the U.S. or is stored by a U.S. company. The U.S. government has legal authority to go and get that data if it pertains to a foreign intelligence target. And we know from public declassified reports, not leaks on Discord, this is legit, we know that there are 230,000 foreign targets that the U.S. government uses this power to target every year. Why am I talking about this? Because it illustrates that foreign data controlled by your companies can be a really, really good source of intelligence. So if we know this, I think we can safely assume that China knows this, and that the Singapore data center, for example, that is staffed by ByteDance personnel, is probably a really good source of intelligence for the Chinese Communist Party. I'm going to be fair to them and assume that they are no less intelligent and clever than we are and that they've figured this out. Do you trust any assurances whatsoever that they've given that this data is not being used for those purposes?
So look, it's, again, completely possible that if Americans' user data wound up in China or under Chinese control, say in Singapore where their employees could have access to it, that yes, they could mine it for whatever insights they wanted. That's why I think a ban on federal government phones, military phones, diplomats, members of Congress, we shouldn't have our data accessed by China. The general public, not so much a concern. Yes, it's a concern. And part of that concern would be to have that risk be brought down by having the data stored here in the United States under fairly airtight rules that would prevent it from escaping to China. Historical data that's already gone to China, if it has, let's assume worst case it has, why not? That's a subject and could be mined for whatever insights they want, including before we implemented our military bans and federal government bans. But again, looking at the overall risk, I think that is an appropriate balancing of all the equities here. People can come out at this at different points. That's where I come out.
If we have any audience questions at this point, be delighted to take those. Okay, first hand was up in the back there.
Sure. Oh, thank you.
Please use the microphone.
Hi, Tom Rehnquist. I'm a Crease LBJ alum. I think I want to challenge or at least hear more about the vicious circle aspect of this. If we ban this, what's next? You know, I'm a brave 29-year-old who did not grow up on TikTok, and this is also new to me. Compare that to Lenovo and Volvos, which are real products and useful. This is the equivalent of digital anthrax. Like, this has no social good whatsoever. Why should we have bet this based on the idea that, you know, there's some other things that we might have to ban if we ban this as well?
I'm not so sure I would agree with the characterization of it that way, but look, I don't have, let me just start. I don't use the app. I never have. I've told my kids not to use it. And interestingly, this is probably the one occasion where my kids have listened to me. I'm not arguing that the app doesn't present dangers, but the fact of the matter is the app is informative and useful. I mean, our government agencies, including the Biden White House, uses TikTok to disseminate information. Other government agencies do. It is a source of legitimate information. It is a platform for entertainment. I'm not so sure it's inherently or intrinsically evil. It is not inherently or intrinsically evil. And as I said, once we create precedents in this area, especially in the area of social media, and we haven't talked at all, but I know we don't want to get into the legalities of it, but it is by no means clear that this would pass constitutional muster as a First Amendment matter. It might, but by no means clear. Once we go down that route, and we say this is because of a national security reason, it's going to be pretty easy. The next time around, someone wants to ban, pick something on the left side, Truth Social, to say we don't like Truth Social. It's spreading misinformation and disinformation to Trump supporters, and we want to ban it on alleged national security reasons. You know, where do we stop with this? Is my point. I think this is this is something that the British government has looked at also. Excuse me. The UK government is looking at the same issue, and they're coming out at it at roughly where I'm suggesting, which is that the government can use it. Some government ministries will use it. They're not entering into a general ban, and they recognize the value of it. So it's something they're concerned about too. And it's a series of trade-offs, and like any of these trade-offs, depending upon where you start on the spectrum, you might come out at a different place. I've explained the reasons why I think the balance is that way. I concede that, Adam and I have had many discussions about this. Adam is a little more strict on this than I am, which is fine. And
a lot.
And I get it, a lot, whatever, but, and I recognize the validity of that, but I'm trying to balance all these other factors that I think long-term are going to make more sense for our country. And by the way, I yield to nobody. I'm in terms of my viewing China with deep concern and suspicion. So that's not the issue.
Is it fair to say that lurking in the background here is a debate, a fundamental debate about whether we are already in a Cold War with China and we just need to accept that and buckle down and make the hard choices, or potentially a view that one might attribute to you or read between the lines here, that we need to try to mitigate that competition and steer it away from a hard binary Cold War?
Well, a little bit the latter, but even if it's the former, even if we are in a Cold War with China, I still think long-term we're going to be better positioned in that Cold War with China if we look better than China and deal with it the way I've said. But no matter where you come out, I think there are good arguments on both parts, on both sides, and the essence of this is a nuanced position. And the problem is, in Washington today, we don't do nuance.
So this is a question I would love if any of the audience members have thoughts on this. It seems like based on the crowd we have that someone might. India banned TikTok. India, in theory, from the view of the Washington consensus, where the United States is driving global dialogue on everything, on sanctions, on autocracy versus democracy, and et cetera, rule of law, India is one of the countries that notionally we're trying to influence, a key global swing state, arguably. And yet on TikTok, on Ukraine sanctions, and on various other things that fall in this kind of rule of law, democracy bucket, they're not waiting to hear what we do or waiting to see what we do. They're setting their own path, as, to be fair, India has really in the entire post-World War II era. Are we overestimating our own influence here?
Possibly. Look, India is certainly not an example that we want to emulate on many levels. The Modi government has shown some very significant authoritarian tendencies in a number of areas. We've seen what they've done with press outlets that don't conform to government opinions. We've seen lots of inflaming of racial and ethnic tensions. So I don't think we want to follow India's example, even though it is still the world's largest democracy. They still are adhering to fundamental democratic principles. I think India presents a complex issue because, in part, the way they went about banning it was in the midst of actual hostilities with China, which made it much more politically easy and acceptable to do it domestically. Obviously, we don't have that here in the United States, and I hope we never do. But look, it's a tough issue for us around the world.
Kylie?
Hello. Oh, I don't like hearing my own voice.
And can we ask the questioners to introduce themselves, please?
Hello, I'm Kylie. I'm a dual degree with MGPS program at LBJ School and the Information Studies program at the iSchool. I'm also a cyber fellow with the Strauss Center. So I guess my opinion to what you were positing earlier is that I think India has thus set the precedent for us that banning TikTok doesn't actually have a good influence on your image, because if your opinion that you're stating right now is that they're already entangled in debates over how media is controlled or not controlled, allowed or not allowed in their country, and that comes with the tag of a TikTok ban, then we already see that it's not a good look for a country to do. And my actual question doesn't really pertain to TikTok much. It pertains to those Discord leaks and the sort of internal threat that social media can pose, because I've seen on like War Thunder forums and this Minecraft Discord server that it seems like the worst internal threat to national security is getting into a fight over maps or like weapons capabilities, because all the leaks that happen on like these gaming forums tend to be arguments that people want to win and they have access to classified documents, and so they share them to win an argument. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on sort of just the human aspect to national security in terms of how do we stop that kind of thing before we even talk about foreign adversaries interfering with their own methods.
Maybe we can take the second piece as a question about the motives of leakers, which I know you have a lot of thoughts about, and I saw this gentleman here will be next.
So I certainly hope we don't have too many people who are accessing classified information to win arguments on social media. We obviously, or I shouldn't say obviously, it appears we have that in the case of the leaks on Discord. I have an article in the New Yorker that you could Google on the risk, the national security risks of social media. I think social media does indeed, across the board, whether it's not only TikTok but YouTube, Facebook, whatever, they are platforms that can be misused and present a national security threat precisely because of the misuse of the protections afforded by the very First Amendment itself. And we can't, the Supreme Court has said that Americans have the legal right to receive foreign disinformation and foreign information intended to manipulate public opinion. So these platforms do present a national security risk. How we cope with it, given our values and given the First Amendment, is the issue. On your point about these debates online, I don't know why people are leaking classified information. In some cases, they're doing it because they're have some political point, sort of the everything going back to Daniel Ellsberg, to Reality Winner, to Edward Snowden, of course, quite famously, think they're doing the right thing by exposing what they perceive to be something wrong or improper or illegal. I think they're misguided. That's not the way to deal with classified information that hurts the rest of the country and hurts our national security. There are also some people who do leaks because they're misguided and they want to take classified stuff home for some reason. It gives them a thrill or who knows what. Lots of reasons for it. We'll see how this Discord story plays out. I wouldn't be at all surprised, Adam and I were talking about this last night, I wouldn't be at all surprised if we see an arrest made in this latest incident fairly soon, just because it sort of looks a little sloppy and looks amateurish as opposed to something that, say, Russia or China might have done, but we'll see.
Here, and then I saw we have two up back there who will come to next, right here first.
Hi, thank you for your talk. It was very interesting. John de Meyer from the Catholic University of Louvain in Belgium. So recently a lot of European countries have started banning TikTok, and privacy advocates in Europe have pointed out some hypocrisy, saying that why are we so concerned about data going to China, while there are no talks whatsoever, or I mean not so much about the huge flow of data that's going from Europe to the United States. So I would like to have your opinion on that. What do you think? Is there, of course, I agree that China does not pose the same threat for Europeans as the US, but there are still some national security concerns from our side, from potential spying or intelligence operation from the US towards the EU.
So the cross-border data flows, you just articulated better than I did this push-pull of globalization and fragmentation, and there's absolutely very, very good reasons why the data should flow back and forth to facilitate communications and commerce, et cetera. And yet at the same time, we have the concerns you just referenced. I might add that although the EU has banned TikTok for its diplomats and for certain, and some countries have also gone ahead and banned it for government purposes, there's no European country that has banned it for the general public. So again, in keeping with what I've described before, maybe that'll happen, maybe not. I tend to doubt that we'll get there for various reasons, including just pure political reasons. But look, this question of cross-border data flows is a difficult one. It directly highlights the point I've made before, which is that we're still grappling on a case-by-case basis with these things. We're looking, I'm sure you're familiar with the arrangements going back to something called Privacy Shield between the United States and Europe, which basically, in which the EU said to America, we're not happy with American companies like Facebook and Google, et cetera, taking Europeans' data, bringing it into the United States, where in theory, thanks to the powers that Adam alluded to before, the United States spy agencies might have access to this under certain conditions. And look, that's a issue that the Biden administration is working on right this minute. We're probably going to come up with a very ad hoc specific set of agreements associated with that. I think this whole technological area, to make a broader point, I think our current approach to these issues are one-off, one-shot decisions about technology. We're scared to make big, broad decisions about this and establish deeper rules of the road precisely because we have difficulty predicting where technology is going. So we have a decision about TikTok, a decision about EU cross-border data flows. We have a decision about something else. And weaving them in together in a logical way gets very difficult. So that's why we need to spend more time coming up with comprehensive, integrated, coherent ways of dealing with the pluses and minuses of the digital revolution. We're talking something that's going to take 20 years. I mean, we'll get there, but it's going to take 20 years before we look back and say, gosh, why was everyone arguing about this?
Sorry, I have to exercise the prerogative to respond briefly to this one. I testified before the Senate about this back in September. It's fair to say I have strong feelings. From the perspective of a European, China takes data. The US takes data. What's the difference? The difference is that the United States has thousands of military personnel and nuclear weapons. I don't need to tell you this. NATO headquarters is in Belgium, stationed in Europe for over 70 years now as part of a security umbrella that extends across most of the European continent. So what are we using the data for? That's the question. And is it aligned with your interest or against your interest? Obviously, the track record shows, many Europeans might not like to hear this, it's pretty well aligned. Those have been the 70 most peaceful, freest, most prosperous years in European history under the American security umbrella. Sure, there have been little spats, lovers' quarrels here and there, but the United States is not trying to control the democratic fate of European countries. Look what China does with interdependence to Australia, to Lithuania, to other countries in its near abroad. The second you will invite the Dalai Lama, the second you criticize China, they pull the leash. It's completely different. And anyone who tells you otherwise is just wrong.
And can I just add, for those of you who are interested, you should look at Adam's testimony. It was really terrific. So let me pay you the public compliment. Very thoughtful and very, very compelling. And another fact, just a footnote to this, is when the U.S. accesses data of foreigners, it does so under a very clear legal regime. We're not going to get into it today, but there's lots of rules and precedent, detailed congressional and presidential rulings on this, including court cases. It's overseen in a very clear way. That couldn't possibly be further from the truth about the way China accesses this data. So huge differences that we sometimes don't really fully appreciate.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we're getting the hook. I see there are a few questions left. We'll be happy to chat with you outside afterwards for a few minutes, I'm sure. Thank you all for your attention and for your great questions. And thank you to Glenn Gerstell.
Thank you.